This is the Gentle Rebel Podcast, episode 307.
The Gentle Rebel Podcast.
For introverts, highly sensitive people, and creative misfits.
Well, hello, welcome to the Gentle Rebel Podcast, where I explore how to live a more meaningful life as a sensitive, creative type person without getting overwhelmed by all the noise and absurdity and craziness and hostility of our modern world. My name is Andy Mort. I'm a songwriter, a performer, and a massive introvert and highly sensitive person. And I love helping other Gentle Rebels find the courage and perspective required to make their own quiet stand for what truly matters in life to them. Welcome to episode number 307, where today I want to talk about quitting. That's today's word, quitting. Before I do, just a quick shout out to Bonnie and to Marina. Thank you so much for joining the Patreon ranks and supporting the show in the past couple of weeks. I hope you're enjoying the private podcast feed and the back catalogue of all the kind of Patreon exclusive stuff that's there. Really great to have you on board. So quitting, quitting. It's kind of a negative word in some ways. I don't know if it's always a negative word or become a negative word. I don't know. The phrases such as winners don't quit and quitting is the only true failure. If you want to truly fail, then the only thing you do is quit. And in some context, this kind of might be true, especially if quitting is a reaction to just that kind of that sort of natural disappointment or a struggle with something that you really want to do. Maybe you've had a little setback, and if you quit just at the sign of the slightest struggle, then maybe that is failure. But it's become, I don't know, increasingly clear to me that we carry this idea around quitting in such a kind of black and white way that it kind of almost makes us fear quitting. It puts quitting on this kind of pedestal that is probably not necessarily helpful. And quitting is kind of letting go of something that we're holding on to at a basic level. The root of the word is equated to kind of being free, to clearing, to establishing innocence as well, like acquittal in a kind of court context, in a criminal sense. And it's, to release, to let go, to abandon, to be calm, to rest. And none of these ideas carry the negative connotations that come from, that idea of just unnecessarily giving up on something or allowing that failure to make you quit, and I kind of like the space that these ideas provide. I think it's actually not even just not a negative idea. There's a kind of positive thing that kind of sits in there, quitting as releasing, as letting go, as abandoning, clearing, wiping the slate clean, and so on. And so obviously there are both negative and positive connotations tied up in this. And in this episode, I want to kind of move beyond that sense of quitting equals bad or quitting equals good, and just to see quitting as an option. It's always an option. And so this question of what is this process of quitting in order to do? What is this process of letting go, of abandoning, of clearing, of whatever it is? What's the kind of intention behind it? What's the purpose of it? What's the thing driving it? And I've been thinking about this a lot recently, in the context of the podcast itself. But also it came to mind just last week when I took part in a live question and answer session at the end of the INF Summit, of which I was really fortunate to be a part. So I'd gone on this live Q&A on Monday evening and kind of hadn't really thought about what it would entail until I got there and sort of saw all the other guests there waiting, and they were starting to answer some questions, and then the number of people watching was increasing and all this sort of stuff. And I shared on Twitter some reflections that I've had on the impact of some quite severe imposter syndrome that I was experiencing in that session, and the voice that was essentially telling me to quit. And I shared on Twitter how this voice was subdued. And so I've kind of got hold of the thread that I created. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it out because it kind of sums up this. I don't know if you experience imposter syndrome, or you experience that little voice, that inner voice of fear that sometimes might lead you to quit, then this might be helpful. So I wrote, it was such a privilege to be included by Lauren Sapala and Jazz Hoti in the INF Summit. Last night ended with a live online Q&A. I was sat listening to the other amazing guests answering questions, and as time went on, I began to feel unbearable imposter feelings. I was very tempted to just slip away and leave the call. My heart started beating out of my chest, and I was terrified of being asked a question. By the time I was asked a question, I didn't really listen to it because my head was so noisy with crippling thoughts. Not least, you're completely ill-equipped to answer this, whatever this is. I'm not listening. I don't know what the question is. And so I was unable to formulate a coherent answer. So something came out of my mouth. I'm not sure what it is. Fortunately, the call wasn't recorded, as far as I'm aware. So there's no evidence of this. I've added that to the Twitter thread. But what I did do was engage my inner Brené Brown and go for some balls to the wall vulnerability, admitting exactly what I was feeling to the group. And while it came out in a bit of a jumble, I'm so glad I did, for two reasons. First, by outing the feeling, it removed its power. Just like that. It was gone. I guess it was naming the shame. Like standing up to the bully, it scarpered and became tiny. Second, as evidenced by the messages I've been receiving since the call, it validated other people's feelings and reassured them that it's okay to feel like an imposter. It reminds me that imposter syndrome is not something to beat as much as it is something to shine a light on, because when the light shines, it shows something that many of us have in common, and it also shows what feels like a big, dark, monstrous shadow to be little more than a pruny little naked mole rat. This applies to many unnamed shames, inner voice bullies, and there really is something collectively powerful and therapeutic about simply removing these kinds of masks that we might hide behind and use to justify our existence, and thus more deeply entrench the imposter feelings of other people and ourselves. No more. Let's shine our torches on the naked naked mole rats. Okay, this thread, and certainly that metaphor, seems to have run its course now. So, yeah, that was my kind of take on the honesty that I'd employed as a way of. It was really pretty much the only thing I could do in the face of that imposter syndrome, because my mind wasn't working properly. I was my heart was literally beating out of my chest. I could feel it sort of pulsating. I'll talk more about this in the in this week's extended play episode, the kind of Patreon exclusive private play podcast, which you can listen to. Basically, it's just $3 a month, and you get the private podcast feed as well as all the other stuff on Patreon. And it's kind of a more vulnerable, candid weekly episode. So I'm continuing to do that one weekly while I do this one monthly. And I basically just explore ideas and themes in a kind of more informal and spontaneous way. So like none of it's scripted or anything like that. I play some songs, talk about the songs, talk about the kind of what's gone into those songs and creative process more generally and that kind of thing. So, yeah, and you can have episodes delivered to your favorite podcast app wherever you're listening to this right now through Patreon. So, and I also give a shout out to you in the next main monthly show, like I did earlier. So, find out more at patreon.com/Andy Mort. Come and give it a whirl. As I say, it's only $3, and it just really helps to fund the ongoing creation of this show, basically. So to bring this kind of back to this point of quitting and of vulnerability and of shame. Shame is such a powerful driving force in our lives. I don't know if you've come across it, but a few days ago, the rugby player Danny Cipriani, who's played for England in the past, he plays for Gloucester, and he put out this really powerful video on Instagram about the role shame had in the suicide of his close friend, Caroline Flack, who was a TV presenter and public personality. She took her own life last week, and this amazingly vulnerable video from Danny Cipriani about this kind of constant threat of public shaming. And the media's desire to pick up on anything they can draw attention to as reasons to kind of point and laugh and to judge and basically sell more copies of whatever they're selling to get more click-throughs and that kind of stuff. And he shared from a real heart of vulnerability about his own struggles, his own shame, and his understanding that to defeat the power of shame, you've got to be vulnerable. You've got to shine that light on that naked mole rat, basically, and to speak the thing that the shame wants you to fear releasing. And so here we have an example of quitting on shame, of releasing, of freeing, of abandoning, of detaching, of divorcing, of giving up the power of this thing that is holding you captive. How to quit shame. Vulnerability. And the clues always sit inside that voice of shame. You know what you need to do to quit because it's the very thing that the shame is telling you to keep hidden. It's a bit like Viktor Frankl's School of Logotherapy. And I think he uses it in, I don't know if it's in Man's Search for Meaning, but in one of his books, he talks about this example of someone who's like sweats profusely when speaking to a room of people. He gets really, really nervous and starts sweating and then feels this massive sense of shame about the sweat patches on his shirt. He's trying to hide them. He tries to do everything to avoid anybody seeing that he's sweating. And actually this shame then makes the problem worse. The sweat increases because of the fear that people will see the sweat. And the voice says, if people see you sweating, you're going to be ridiculed, you're going to be belittled, you're going to be undermined, and you'll lose all of your authority and your sense of worth, and, just life won't be worth living. And this kind of reinforces the issue and creates even more sweat. And so through this logotherapy, Viktor Frankl says, points out this solution of just shining that light on it, on that naked mole rat. Make a point of it, show it to people, tell people that you sweat when you have to speak in public. Just be open about it, joke about it, intentionally and deliberately show the thing that the shame wants you to hide. And like any bully, the shame loses all its power when the very thing it's using as a weapon against you becomes the tool you can use to connect with other people, to bring that sense of peace and humour and calm within yourself and to the world around you. This is exactly what happens when people are disarmed in this way. For me, if someone highlighted their sweating problem, pointed a finger at it and said, I get so nervous before I speak, and this is what happens. Look at all this sweat. Good job I brought a spare T-shirt with me. So when I finish speaking, I can put that on. I wouldn't be thinking, why have you that's too much information? What are you doing sharing that? I'd think, oh man, I thought it was just me. I'm so glad that it's not just me. And as far as the inner workings go, just like when I mentioned my imposter feelings, they're kind of disarmed and they shrink back. And Viktor Frankl says this is exactly what happens. The sweat slows down, it disappears, because there's no longer any sense of fear attached to that symptom. So there's both fear and freedom in letting go. And shining a light on my imposter feelings in any given situation, it allows me to hear what they sound like, and also to experience the mirror from others, where those who need to hear the validation and will say, oh man, I thought it was just me. I'm so glad it's not just me. And even I could see you sat there with, like, I had no idea that you were feeling that inside, which is something else I've got. You're there with your professional looking setup. You've got your headphones on and your big microphone and all of that. I've had a look at your website, and you look like you know what you're doing. You look like you've kind of professional and all this sort of stuff. So it's the most surprising thing ever to know that you're experiencing that imposter syndrome. Because do you know what? I look at other people who look like they have everything sorted. They look professional. They look like they know exactly what they're doing. I'm impressed by what they say. And my assumption is they are feeling that thing that I'm projecting onto them, that they feel like they have everything sorted. They feel like they're professional. They feel like, everybody should listen to what they have to say and all that sort of stuff. And actually finding out that people think that about me is a really helpful message, because it tells me that actually those people that I'm projecting that onto don't necessarily feel like that. And in fact, the more people I talk to about this kind of stuff, the more I realize there are very, very few people who feel like that. And the people that do feel like that are probably not the kinds of people that I want to be sort of engaging too much with anyway. That's kind of encouraging. Right, so this might be a slightly abstract start to approaching the topic on quitting, but it does kind of set up the angle that I want to take for this, and to do it from a lens that resonates with the minimalism that I discussed in the last episode last month. You know, knowing when to quit and feeling okay with it, knowing that just basically that quitting is an option. It's always an option. I believe this is a vital side of the same coin, which gives us knowledge of when not to quit. We must hold this concept with all the grey and the nuance and complexity that it requires. Not to load the word quitting with any single emotion. You know, forget any mantra that says quitting is for losers, or those who succeed know when to quit. You know, these kinds of statements are the definition of simplistic, basically. Instead, it's kind of my hope that we can develop a more mature, a more kind of thought through attitude and relationship with our stuff, with our commitments, with our relationships themselves, and ultimately with our sense of self, to hold both lightly and reverently to things so that we can design lives of deep value and joy. Right, after this little break, I'm going to explore some of the things that we would do well to listen to when it comes to preparing ourselves for releasing, for letting go, for detaching, for finding that sense of freedom in our lives that comes when we understand that quitting is always an option.
Heaven is a hole in the sky. The stars are cracks in the ceiling at night. I just keep watching them for a sign that you'll be alright. 'Cause every time there's a knock on my door, I fall to my hands and knees on the floor. 'Cause when your wreckage washes up on my shore, you're not like before. And you try to explain who's at fault for your mistakes, but I won't be the debris in your hurricane. Used to be such a delicate kid, a lonely fish in a sea full of squid. So I can't blame you for leaving how you did. You just fell off the grid. Heaven is a hole in the sky. The stars are cracks in the ceiling at night. You can't be your own alibi as hard as you try. It's in the tired refrain you're singing over and over again, and you try to explain who's at fault for your mistakes. But I won't be the debris in your hurricane. I won't be the debris in your hurricane. I won't be the debris in your hurricane.
Right, ended that on completely the wrong note, but you know, positive end. That was Death Cab for Cutie off their last album, Thank You for Today. Just a really nice song that I felt was kind of relevant to this idea of quitting. So Yeah, that's why I kind of played it. So a little while ago, I stumbled on the word aphiemi or apiemi when doing some research into ideas around kind of the idea of forgiveness. The concept of forgiveness was one that just kept coming up in different areas. And so I was exploring its kind of roots and that kind of stuff, and found that this apiemi is the main word used to translate, or forgiveness was the main word that was being used to translate this word apiemi in the Bible. And yet apiemi is translated in a whole range of other ways as well, making it kind of a little bit more nuanced and deep than the ideas that we might tie up with the word forgiveness on its own. Which, for many, many people, it's a difficult word to make sense of. It feels like almost kind of letting someone off the hook, or ignoring, or allowing people to basically do whatever they want, even though it's harmed you. It's a word that is kind of carries a lot of baggage and carries a lot of confusion. But yeah, this apiemi is said to be a colloquial saying to mean like let the pot drop, which in my mind is kind of, think of like being in the kitchen, picking up a hot pot with your bare hands until it gets so hot you're like, I can't handle this anymore, at which point you kind of throw it or just let it fall on the floor. And in a metaphorical sense, this fits with many ways the word has been translated and used. What we have in apiemi is less about the kind of outward expression of giving forgiveness to another person, and more of an inward action in my mind. Becoming separate from, placing distance between, abandoning, divorcing, extracting oneself from something, to cut the chains that bind you to the thing. And then to let it disappear. Weirdly, apiemi is also translated as like pardon, divorce, abandon, leave, permit, yield, tolerate. And on some levels, this doesn't make obvious sense, really. If the pot is hot, obviously it's sensible to tolerate it. Not really. However, if we kind of peel back the layers, I reckon we can find a deeper meaning that these words have in common, which, I don't know, there's this thread of kind of freedom, of liberation, of release, of salvation. They can all be the kind of pathway to freedom, depending on where we're at as an individual. And they're kind of active. They speak to us in our own circumstances as individuals. But we can also think about it in a kind of wider collective cultural context as well, when addressing ideas and histories or stories that are keeping us tethered to pain, to harm, to this inability to move forwards properly as a community, as a culture. Notice that some of these words resonate with the idea of quitting as well, abandoning, releasing, removing oneself, or in fact, quitting the quitting, staying, tolerating, pardoning, permitting, yielding. Wow, I mean, these are almost, on the surface, they're like opposites. But I think it all depends on context and circumstance and the processes that are at work inside of us as individuals. For example, you might always tolerate, you might always pardon, you might be someone who just yields or bends to the will of those around you, even those who cause you pain. When it feels hard, or when there's the prospect of conflict, you're just like, okay, yeah, I'll yield to their position. I'll yield to their opinion, to their desires. And this is your path of passivity, if that's the case for you. Or it might be that you're quick to, when you don't get your own way, you're quick to abandon, you up sticks and leave, you divorce yourself from the thing, from whatever it is around that you're doing when things get hard. That's your way of dealing with it. Your natural instinct is to just leave, to abandon, to divorce. So that's your path of passivity. One is no better than the other. One is no worse than the other. But freedom is found when we cross the line and consciously do the more difficult thing. We go against that grain, against that path of passivity, to release ourselves from the thing to which we naturally tether. It's to yield when all you want to do is get your own way, when that becomes such a big part of who you are and how you hold on to things. It's to pardon someone when all you want to do is hold a grudge, and you find meaning and you find some kind of sense of identity in the fact that you hold grudges. It's to tolerate when you don't like or understand the perspective of another person. When you think they're wrong, I'm right. It's to let go of the power that has within you. It's to permit when you want to clamp down and eradicate. It's to divorce when all you want to do is keep trying the same thing with the hope that somehow it will create miraculously different results. It's to abandon when you want to stay and pretend that nothing has changed. It's to forgive when you want to punish. These are the things that eat us up inside. It's to release ourselves, to become free from those, from the tyranny of our own inner drives that keep us doing what we know isn't working very well. I mean, they're all different things. Some of them will speak to us all in different ways, I think. What is it that we could do with quitting? Those habits of interaction with people, whether we've been too tolerant of stuff that's causing us pain, or we've been too quick to point fingers, to blame others, to just abandon ship. However we hold ourselves and hold other people and hold the world in general, how might quitting open us up to freedom? This takes me into another area which I only actually thought about early this morning. I was reflecting on one of the questions that was asked in the INF Summit Q&A that I mentioned earlier, which was about kind of links between physical symptoms and the suppression of your intuition. In other words, how do our bodies tell us that we're denying our intuition? That sense of like knowing, pushing down the thing that you know is speaking to you. It's telling you something about a decision you need to make or whatever it is, not listening to it, ignoring it, both at conscious and unconscious levels. For me, it usually shows up at night, teeth grinding and weird dreams, which then through the power of kind of journaling and I begin to process it, start to kind of unpick the intuitive messages that I'm pushing down, that I'm denying. But anyway, the thing that I was thinking about this morning was distinguishing between messages born of intuition and messages born of fear, because they can feel similar. The right brain niggle within ourselves that's trying to communicate with our left brain decision making. And I think this is key to think about when it comes to kind of grappling with opportunities and commitments and even our broader kind of goals and dreams that we might have for our lives. I mention it here because it's closely tied to quitting. We quit the right things when our intuition is speaking. We quit the wrong things when our fear is speaking. And by fear, I mean kind of ego fear. Psychological fear, not real fear. Real fear is healthy and helpful. It keeps us safe when facing genuine threats. It's why we drive at safe speeds and put our seatbelts on, and keep the other side of the fence when there's a lion or whatever. Maybe, don't swim in the sea when the red flag is flying, that kind of stuff. That is a healthy, good fear to kind of listen to. But ego fear, on the other hand, can feel the same. It's kind of born from the same place, but it's linked with our left brain's self-perception. The inner voice that makes up stories about things to give meaning to events, placing you as at the center of things as the victim or the potential victim of whatever the thing in question is. It's the voice telling you to quit because you're not good enough, telling you that everyone else is better. It's that imposter syndrome. It's comparison. It's envy. We distinguish between fear and intuition when we hear our answers to certain questions. How much does this really matter to me? Am I feeling free by the prospect of doing this, or heavily burdened by the possibility that this might happen? What would I be willing to pay for this if I had unlimited resources? If I knew I would definitely be safe and okay in doing this, would I still choose to do it? Or would I choose to do it? Fear demands an instant reaction, pumps us with adrenaline, tells us to fight, to fly, to freeze, or to fawn. Which is why we end up quitting things we want to do, not quitting things we don't want to do, and not making any progress on our goals or committing ourselves to things that are actually harming us. Again, we all react differently to fear. These are survival mechanisms that can keep us safe in genuine situations, but when the left brain gets involved and starts to craft and create those stories, they can completely derail us. Right, I think it's time for another break. It's got a bit heavy.
Dressing up like the old times, selling on for the public eye. Allow a lens when it suits him, and meet the lady who lied and asked him, are you one of the elegant people? Are you painted by someone else's eye? Are you one of the elegant people like you wanted to be? Going back up to your place, there's nowhere better to find that bad taste. The sharp and shifty is business, and lying white when the people ask me, are you one of the elegant people? Are you painted by someone else's eye? Are you one of the elegant people like you wanted to be? Yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am. Yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am. Yes, I am, yes, I am. No, I'm not, but I can. Yes, I can. Walking into a red room, staring back is enough for anyone until he told you he loves you. You never trusted him when he asked you, are you one of the elegant people? Are you painted by someone else's hand? Are you one of the elegant people like you wanted to be? Are you one of the elegant people? Are you painted by someone else's hand? Are you one of the elegant people like you wanted to be? Yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am. Yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am, yes, I am. Yes, I am, yes, I am. No, I'm not, but I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Right, let's have a think about some of the things that create a desire to quit. It can come from all kinds of different things, and the most important work that we can do is basically just to raise awareness, both awareness in general about the way the world is and how things are, and also self-awareness about what's going on within us and how we can influence our own responses to these things. And so what I'd love to do is just think of quitting as an objective thing. You know, it's neither good nor bad. It's just an option, detached from judgment. So as we think about these kind of a few causes of inner strain, We can find self-awareness. We can learn to tune into our intuitive separate from our intuition separate from our fear, as a way to kind of filter and process whether or not quitting is the right option, the right thing to do, to abandon, to untether, to divorce and so on, or to yield, to permit, to tolerate the place that we're in, whether for a limited time or whether it's to give ourselves over to it more indefinitely. But to understand quitting is an option. We get to choose whether or not to implement it. So the first cause of strain is one I've already mentioned. It's that imposter syndrome. Feeling like you're a fraud, that you don't belong, that everybody else is more deserving than you to be here doing this. I had that desire to quit on that Q&A call. The option was there. The option to quit was there. I could have quit, but I didn't want to quit. The outcome meant more to me than that relieving that kind of pain, that fear. I wanted to be there. So I fought the fear by speaking it. There are, on the other hand, however, times when my imposter syndrome isn't worth fighting. In fact, there are probably times when it's speaking some kind of truth. It's actually more my intuition talking, not this kind of fear. Because there are times where I am genuinely in the wrong place, surrounded by the wrong people. A place I don't want to be, surrounded by people that I don't actually want to invest my time and energy in. And it's no good in those situations to really speak out my vulnerability at times like that, because A, I don't care about the outcome. I'm not invested. This doesn't matter to me. And B, what I might do if I do speak sort of vulnerably in that situation is I might alienate myself. I might put myself in that position where actually I'm then dealing with pain and dealing with shame for the thing that I've said, for something I don't actually care about. And that leaves pieces to pick up afterwards. The second cause of strain is stuff, too much stuff. This comes back to our conversation about minimalism last month. When it comes to stuff, quitting is always an option. It might not feel like it. It might feel overwhelming, but we don't have to carry everything we think we have to carry. And I love that metaphor, that idea of the bag that Lauren Sapala talked about, her friend Everett Bogue, having 57 items in his bag. And if you wanted to add something new, you'd have to sacrifice something old, something that's already in the bag. You'd have to get rid of that. And so it's this question of the kind of finitude of things as a great way of framing the finitude of all things, our relationships, our belongings, our commitments. We can think of all these things in a bag and we say, okay, to add this new thing, that comes at the price of this old thing. There is always a cost to this. We can't do everything that we want to do. And the more we add, the less we have left to kind of give to the things that we already have and to the things that we're adding as well in the process. It's the option to quit, to abandon, to untether, to release ourselves from the bonds to things is truly liberating. Might not be possible immediately, but just raising that awareness of what is causing us to feel tethered, to feel trapped, to feel anchored in a really negative way, or what is pulling us away from the things that truly matter. That awareness is the first step in changing our relationship with our sense of meaning and our sense of freedom. And then people pleasing. So I mentioned people pleasing, I think in the last episode. I went into a lot more detail in an extended play episode recently as well, which I was very much in two minds about whether publishing, because it was a little bit like the shame, the vulnerability. But yeah, this idea of people pleasing is much bigger than I ever gave it credit for. And I've heard from a lot of people who have issues with attachment to people pleasing. It seems like, for introverts and highly sensitive people in particular, this is a real thing that seems to come up over and over again. And it's not easy to overcome. In fact, it seems like I don't think you can overcome it, so to speak. It seems like something that's there in our mental blueprints, in our scripts. It's always there to some degree because it gets kind of instilled early on in life as a mechanism for coping, reacting to the world. But it is manageable, and parts of that script can be edited, can be rewritten. I used the word fawn earlier when describing the stress responses, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And this was a new one on me until Tula highlighted it in The Haven. We were talking about kind of confidence and people pleasing. And I think it makes a lot of sense as a kind of stress response as a trauma bond. Basically, the response to fear is to fawn on the so-called captor, on the perpetrator, treating them with respect in the hope of winning them to a place of acceptance. It's it can then turn into a genuinely real feeling of admiration and trust and even love. They say this trauma bond, this is at the heart of Stockholm syndrome. It's what makes you kind of identify with your captors, drives domestic abuse cycles, evident in gaslighting, where the perpetrator confuses any potential fight or flight risk by if they're very aware of what they're doing, giving gifts and performing random acts of kindness and showing a softer, more vulnerable side in order to just deepen that bond with the person that they are, that they have kind of at their mercy, essentially. And so this is at the extreme end of the natural people-pleasing drive. In everyday life, it can keep us attached to things that are not good for us, habits and certain relationships and behaviors and so on, which are unhelpful, which are unhealthy. But the option is always there to quit, even if it feels impossible, even if it feels like that is not an option. Recognizing these things is the first step. There are always things and people and organizations that ultimately can help us quit. I've come to see people pleasing almost like an addiction. It doesn't feel good. It's pulling you apart from yourself, and yet there doesn't feel like any alternative. But there is an alternative, and there are ways to get to that alternative. Okay, one last break, and then I'm going to close things out by talking about a few things that we can begin doing to help us create a better relationship with quitting as we step forwards.
Into a small room, a room with no windows, a room only bad men go after the hunt. There is nothing of you in there. Interrogation, the heart of a nation speeding with fear. Those blue lights on the horizon don't feel safe anymore. I am running scared inside this nightmare, with my back to the wall, with my back to it all. There's nothing of you out there, a sponge that's been wrung dry, a solitary magpie that's gathering dust. Those blue lights on the horizon don't feel safe anymore. Inside this nightmare, with my back to the wall, with my back to it all. I'm talking to the cat again, trying to make sense of it. I think I might have burdened him. Can you die from a broken heart? Did he die from a broken heart? You can't hide from a broken heart. Those blue lights on the horizon don't feel safe anymore. this nightmare with my back to the wall, with my back to it all.
So that was, I think, going to be our next single as Early Bird. It's called Blue Lights. We've recorded it, haven't got it mixed yet, but I think that's the one we're going to take into the studio next. So, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the songs today. I found this a really fascinating topic to explore. You know, I never really know where the kind of, when I come up with these words, I say, right, I'm going to do a podcast about this, about that. I never really know where it's going to take me once I commit to them. Often I assume it's going to go one way. And when I start to kind of write and reflect and explore the ideas around it, end up in a completely different place. And so I guess my biggest vision with these things is to kind of pose questions, to help us think about things at other levels, from different perspectives, that kind of stuff, to converse with our unconscious and create space to access that kind of right side of our brain that we've talked about, rather than, you know, finding nice, neat answers to everything and a nice kind of 8-step blueprint to, you know, some solution. My favorite things to listen to and to read and all that sort of stuff create this feeling. They create a sense. They don't necessarily help like kind of package things neatly. They open something up in me, which might be completely different from the intentions of the creator of the thing, but they just help to unpick a little inner knot that no one can know is in me apart from me once I've encountered that thing. So I don't know if that makes any sense. So yeah, that's essentially what I hope these things kind of do a little bit of. So yeah, I mean, I know from research that there's a lot of stuff out there about quitting, both from the perspective of like how to keep going when you feel like you want to quit, how not to quit, and also like how to quit, how to set boundaries and quit things. And so I guess it's been my aim to just go down a step and to think about what quitting is, I suppose, in itself, and how we might always carry it with us as an option, without judgment, without attachment, but in our own kind of power and awareness, with our own, just carrying it, just saying, do you know what? I can't, the option is there to quit. And how can this happen? I mean, just mention boundaries. Boundaries are a big thing. You know, learning, refining, listening, noticing, accessing our intuitive feelings, so that over time we don't even need to think about or assess the meaning of things. We just know whether something is right to continue with or not. This again, that right brain level of consciousness, the unmeasurable yet very real level of being that is detached from the kind of story of self. It's not influenced by thought. It's not influenced by the attachment of meaning to things, ascribing meaning to things. This is who I am. This is what I must do. All that sort of stuff. It's just that deeper awareness, deeper consciousness. It's kind of impossible to talk about because by nature, in trying to discuss it, you attach words to it and kind of turn it into a left brain thing. But you know what I'm talking about, you know, flow, that sense of knowing, that oneness. I'm nearly finished reading Chris Niebauer's book, No Self, No Problem, which I highly recommend if you're interested in this kind of stuff, in this left brain, right brain thing. It was recommended to me by Josie George after I kind of talked about Julia Cameron's Artist Way book and the stuff that she writes in that about I don't know, I can't remember the term she uses, but it's the same thing. It's kind of analytical side, the left side of the brain, and the kind of creative side, the artist side on the right side of the brain. And when they come to kind of clash and also how we as a society kind of judge the difference between them and that kind of stuff. So really fascinating book. I recommend that. No Self, No Problem. Jacob Norby is involved with the publisher as well, who published it. So definitely check it out. Another way, as I touched on earlier, to really embrace a kind of new relationship with quitting is to just bring vulnerability to the forefront, to defeat that voice of shame. Whatever that voice of shame is telling you not to do that thing. Telling us to hide, to hold things back, to envy, to compare, to feel less than. Even things like just admitting in moments of envy, like, man, I'm experiencing this thing where I'm like looking at you and I'm feeling really envious of what you have. And actually just bringing that out often completely undermines the power of it. And so when we move into a life of honesty and openness about our fears and our desires and our shames, we unblock the power of those things, shining a light on the truth of them so that we can see what they really are. Some of them are those naked mole rats. Some of them, are meaningful. And so we see them as they truly are rather than what they are in accordance with the story we've written about them. So this puts us in a great position to be able to choose the right course of action. Whether it's to quit, whether it's not to quit, or whether it's to quitting. I don't know. I'm currently developing a free resource kind of about some of this stuff, which Patreon supporters have been helping me with. Talked about it last week in the extended play episode. And it kind of covers some of the stuff that I've been talking about today. It delves into some more practical ideas around saying no without burning bridges. So how to say no with more grace and to make space for better yeses. Setting boundaries that leave us energized, that don't leave us feeling guilty. And also dealing with unsolicited advice and feedback and criticism from kind of strangers and from people that we know as well. And so the resource is not ready as I'm recording this. It's still kind of, in development stage. But if you'd like me to let you know when you can get hold of it, if that sounds like something that you'd find useful, I'm going to put a sign up form in the show notes for this episode, or go to andymort.com/dare I say. I think it's probably going to be called that, something around those lines. So it's about kind of developing that courage to implement better no's, to set boundaries, to respond to unsolicited advice and stuff like that. It will be free. It's just going to be like a free resource that I'm making available because lots of people have kind of said that these kinds of things are their biggest struggle. So if you want to be kind of first to know when I put that out, then go and sign up in the show notes or andymort.com/dare I say. Probably be in the form of like short videos, an ebook, maybe like an audio thing like this. I don't know yet. I'm developing it. So, and I'm not putting pressure on myself to rush it out because I want it to actually be okay. So cool. Hope that sounds good. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more of my music, the stuff that I've been sharing, and if you want me to kind of chat about the stories behind the songs and all that kind of stuff and the creative process, then as I said earlier, come and join me in Patreon as a supporting member of the Gentle Rebel community. Just go to patreon.com/AndyMort. It's Patreon. Otherwise, the best thing you can do to support the podcast is to just rate and comment on this show in your chosen podcast application, wherever you listen to this, whether it's Apple or Google or Stitcher or Overcast, whatever. If you like what you hear and have a moment to leave a quick rating and review, it really just genuinely helps to get the show and previous episodes of it into more of the ears of people searching for help and support with these topics that we're exploring each month. So be very grateful if you could do that. Be amazing. Yeah. And I just want to say quickly as well, I'm really enjoying the freedom that actually moving this from weekly to monthly has given me. I've been able to put a lot more thought and time into this episode than I have when it's bang, 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 week on week. So I hope that's come through. And I'd love to hear your feedback. Unsolicited feedback. No, it's solicited. I've just asked for it. So if you have anything nice to say, to send me an email, andy@andymort.com. And I'll be back again next time with another episode of the Gentle Rebel podcast. End of March will be the next time. Until then, do remember, you're an artist. The world needs your art. They'll go and make somebody's day. Goodbye.
Angels in disguise, we can be, 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 we can all be angels in disguise, we can